Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sharpest Call of Duty League podcast. My name is Robert, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, CDLMetrics. Are you excited? This is the last week of Major 1, the qualifier. Yeah, qualifiers. I guess we'll call it qualifiers. Mm-hmm. The qualifier weeks on the Major next week. How you feel about that?
Yeah, excited. It's always a little tricky when we have the 5-week qualifier period, because I do like that we get 7 qualifiers per team. Like, the more data points we get on these teams, the better, especially early in the season. But when it takes a full 5 weeks before that major, and we had the winter break period as well, it does feel like it's a long start to the season. Yeah, excited that we'll have some LAN matches next week. We'll have our first major next week. Just a few more matches before we get there. So yeah, super, super excited.
Yeah. It's really interesting, and we're going to talk about this more in a second here, but this year has been quite interesting so far, I would say. I'm pretty surprised by it so far. So, Modern Warfare, one of the surprises this week, yeah, this did not go well for us this week. I went 0 for 3, you went 1 for 3. I went 1 for 3. It's weird because, like, I still don't understand, like, I don't think these were wrong, maybe with the exception of maybe Seattle. But I don't understand how Toronto lost to Carolina, and I don't understand how Optic lost to Thieves. Like, it was such a weird week. Okay, maybe Miami is good, maybe Cloud9 is not good. But again, this year so far has just been so weird. What are these games? What is happening? I honestly don't know. Things are just so all over the place that I have no idea what the top team is, any of that. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement, and I think most people that watch and follow the CDL would say the same thing. It is hard to pinpoint who the best team or 2 or 3 in the league are right now, and it's also hard to pinpoint where the middle of the pack is, like what teams belong in that next tier down, and then what teams belong at the bottom. I think it's pretty clear now that Vancouver are in a tier by themselves at the bottom. We had this thought of, okay, now with the new roster, maybe they've improved enough to compete with the Miamis and the Bostons of the world and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the more data points we get, the clearer the picture gets, but it's still pretty fuzzy right now. Overall, like last week, I'd say was a really good week if you were an underdog. And we'll get into the matches specifically in a bit here. But yeah, if you were an underdog, like a lot of them just won outright, and a lot of them won pretty easily too. So it was a surprising weekend of results. And I think maybe after one more week of qualifiers here, we'll have a pretty good idea, or at least a better idea of like where these teams tier out with the other teams in the league. So tricky, yeah, 1 for 6 overall from us, but it is what it is. We'll have some bad weeks mixed in here and there.
Yeah, I still don't, even knowing what I know now, I still don't think I would probably still make these same picks again, honestly. Yeah, maybe with the exception of Seattle, Vancouver, but other than that, yeah, I got nothing. Moving on to league news, here were the matches. Again, we're seeing a lot of them went to 4, only one of them went to a game of 5 here. That was Cloud9 versus Boston. Some sweeps here. FaZe sweep Cloud9, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, that's fine. Heretics sweeping Seattle. Yeah, okay, sure. I guess Seattle's not that good. Now, to be fair, that does implicate Optic. Maybe Optic's not that good. So, okay, that's fine. But this was a shocker right here. G2, he's not really reverse sweeping. I guess it is depending on how you... But basically 3-1ing FaZe, which I considered maybe one of the top teams in the entire league. Okay, they comfortably lost game 1, and then they won in round 11... pretty comfortably won the Overload, and then pretty comfortably won Game 4. So that one was pretty shocking. And then again, the same result here with Carolina versus Toronto. Again, another one that we bet on here. Carolina 3-1ing Toronto. After Toronto comfortably won Game 1, they just completely fell apart after that. And then obviously up here, Riyadh, apparently one of the better teams, took down Paris gently. And then obviously down here, Thieves 3-1ing Optic. Just a bunch of really weird results. Obviously, some more weird than others. I think the Thieves one is, yeah, okay, whatever. Thieves have that in them. They can do this. I haven't seen them do it so far. But okay. But G2 had been clearly on the decline here as compared to FaZe. Same thing with Carolina as compared to Toronto. and even Riyadh over Paris Gentlemen. That one's a bit weird, but still defensible. But some of these are just. Which one here is your kind of your biggest upset here?
Yeah, biggest upset I think you have to say is G2 over FaZe. And it's a 3-1 win, so it is very impressive if you're Minnesota, but at the same time, like, these maps are pretty close. It's what it looks like when an underdog wins is, okay, they split the hard points very evenly. Minnesota got the round 11 win in map 2, and they got a 1-point win in that map 3. Like, that's pretty close overall. If you are going to beat a team like FaZe, it's probably going to be by margins that small. But honestly, the fact that they did it in 4 maps is impressive alone, just as it is right there, especially when you see what FaZe did the day before against a team I think you'd put Minnesota next to or close to in a lot of tier lists or rankings. Like, FaZe just destroyed Cloud9. That was not surprising at all. I think that was just another data point for us to go, okay, yeah, FaZe are here. Like, they have rebounded off of a slow start. They're finally getting easy opponents now. Their first few were just a gauntlet. And then, yeah, they turn around the next day and put up that sort of a thing. So it's not a result I want to look too much into if you're FaZe. It is a nice pickup if you're Minnesota. You weren't expected to win that at all. But I'd say that's the biggest underdog that won. A couple others I want to shout out. That Friday afternoon, Riyadh versus Paris. Paris was a big favorite in that series, and they came out and put up the best hardpoint map we've seen from a team. And after that map 1, you're thinking like, all right, yeah, this is already over. And then Riyadh just played the annoying underdog role in that series as well. To me, it looks like that Minnesota FaZe series from Sunday, where the better team wins that map 1. It's comfortable. In the case of Paris, it's really comfortable. Like, it's not even remotely close. And then Riyadh scratched together a round 10 win in Search, the 1-point win where they were really annoying in map 3. I don't know if you got a chance to see that, but essentially Riyadh, like, they got the 2-1 lead in Overload and just completely parked the bus. Like, they held on to the EMP and just turtled up in their own side of the map, and which is risky, right? Because if that doesn't go well, Paris can pick up the EMP and score very quickly. But they played it perfectly, and it was, you could tell, like, Paris was pretty frustrated with it. And then, sure enough, map 4 comes along. Paris dropped their first hard point of the year. It's very close, but Riyadh, really strong finish to that. I think it was a black heart. So that series, I think, really stood out to me. Just the fact that Paris, for as good as they are in hardpoint, they are beatable. It's really tough, but they are beatable, and their woes in Search and Overload are still there, and they still worry me just a little bit to where I can't call them like the best team in the league, but I still think they're very good. Anything else that looks, the Carolina result was a bit interesting. Again, a round 11 goes in your favor, but you really expect Toronto to win that map 3. But Carolina, I think, a much improved team from January onward. I think we can just throw out their December results for now. The reverse sweep with Boston was maybe a little surprising. I had more faith in Boston to win that easily, but it did take a little bit for them to get that done. And then, yeah, the Optic LA series was pretty interesting because it always is. I think we both were strongly in favor of Optic there, but LA finally showed up. It's been a while since we've seen this sort of LA Thieves team show up this way. So good to see that result from them. And anyone's guess as to who the favorite at Major 1 is going to be, because it's all over the place right now.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. I've been thinking a little bit about that. Who even is the favorite right now for Major 1?
If I had to guess...
Oh, okay, go ahead first, I'll say. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. If I had to pick one team and say this team has the best odds to win it, I think I'd take FaZe. But it is tough. Right now, and I don't have my numbers published yet, I'll publish them next week, FaZe do come out as the power ranked number 1 team. It's really close. But they do have a good record, so you know they're going to get a good seed. And then their only match this week is the last match of the weekend. They play Vancouver Surge, who we know are the worst team in the league. So I'd say they're very likely to get the 1 seed, if not a 2 seed or a 3 seed, depending on how that series goes and how a bunch of other ones go and the tiebreakers and all that. But FaZe are looking quite a bit better. I know that Minnesota series just happened, but I think they can bounce back from that. What do you think for a favorite at Major 1?
So I think the favorite will be Optic, but that's only just because of the betting markets and the fact that Optic's going to have to be the favorite. 100%. That
Mm-hmm.
being said, they would not, if I was setting a line, that would not be my favorite, though. And I think that's where, just starting to think about this, is where we start seeing some value, right? Fairly sure Optic's going to be a maybe plus 150, maybe something like that favorite. And you're going to see FaZe probably going to be something like 2, maybe 2 plus 2, 200 plus 250. Maybe something like Cloud, maybe something not Cloud9. Maybe, yeah, Paris could be up there. Toronto could be up there.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota could be up there. Riyadh could be up there. Miami. It's going to depend on where those numbers are. I will say though that the interesting thing you talk about the seeding. I think in some ways the seeding will the seeding for here will matter the least
Mm-hmm.
because you have no idea who that 8 seed is going to be. That could be a good 8 seed or not a good 8 seed, right? As long as you're in winner's bracket, I don't really think the seeding matters too much.
I suppose.
But
I think so. At least how I view the league right now, I think we have five clear cut, like almost co favorites for the major, or just in terms of like team power strength. Like it's to me really close between Optic, LA Thieves, FaZe, Paris, and Toronto. Like those five, I think
yeah,
you can make a case for any of those teams being the best. So I do think there is something to, and I guess it might not shake out this way. In my head, I'm thinking those five will be the top five seeds, but that's not necessarily true because Riyadh are 4-2 right now. I know we'll talk about the standings in a little bit. So I think it depends on how the bracket shakes out in terms of is your round one game against one of those other teams. If it is, your path to win the major is quite a bit harder. But if you can weasel out a start where it's, oh, I'm playing Miami round one or Boston round one or something like that, and just giving yourself a little bit extra cushion in that first round, I think that will help quite a bit. But we got a long ways to get there because right now, like the difference between these teams in the standings is really small. So the standings right now could shake out a ton of different ways.
yeah. I think that's the point. I think it's going to be really interesting who even is the favorite here or anything like that. So I think this is going to be a fascinating major. But again, we're not discussing that today, not yet. That will be next. That topic for next week. For now, though, here as CDL was mentioning, here's the standings here. Very close. Again, 10 points basically separating winner's bracket from loser's bracket. Doesn't get much closer than that. Even then, a 13 and 10 map count for the top for the tie for top for like number one. That's not particularly impressive. Actually, arguably the teams that are in fourth and fifth actually have more impressive. Not to be fair though, they're 3-2. The other ones are 4-2. They have one extra game they have to play there. But still though, like this is a very balancing, with the exception of obviously Vancouver at 4-17. I mean, 11 and 15 versus 13 and 10 is not that different. There's difference obviously, but nothing crazy. That's not a crazy difference. Yeah, this is all over the place. Honestly, I honestly don't know who the better team is. Minnesota, even Minnesota there, 13 and 15. That's again like only two maps under 500. When the top team is 3 maps above 500, like that's not crazy at all. Like honestly, Minnesota, they came out good in the beginning, and they had a couple of weak weeks. Then this week they were a lot better. If you told me, hey, Minnesota makes a run, I wouldn't be crazy. I wouldn't think that's crazy. Miami as well. Thieves again had a couple of weird weeks. They came back this week. They did some stuff. Honestly, I got nothing. One, I'm not even going to try to think of who can get in the winners bracket or not because that's just chaos with their seeding. I don't. There's no way this is going to work well somehow. So good luck figuring that out. We have been in many ways fortunate that we've had so many such dominant teams where like the top seeds never mattered. But now when basically everything from first through eighth matters, good luck. Good luck, CDL team. People who do stats. I don't know who you are, but we're gonna say a prayer for you. I think. I don't know. Good luck. I do not envy your job. Sunday night. I'm not sure when you do this, but whatever. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
We will see the outcome later. And yeah, but before that, moving on to that, we have the matches this week, which will determine the order, and we will obviously talk about next week, the major next week. Okay, so match one on Friday, we've got Optic versus Carolina. Optic minus 400 on the money line, minus 1.5, minus 1.5, minus 163. Optic minus 275 in the hard point, minus 200 in the search, and minus 175 in the control. I like maybe Carolina here. The thing is, a lot of people are going to say that, oh, of course Thieves beat Optic because Thieves are really good. And Optic's really good too. But I don't like Thieves have been really rough for several weeks here. And Optic did drop a map against Vancouver. Now, obviously not the greatest, not the worst thing ever, but they did drop a map against them. Miami swept Vancouver. It's possible Optic might not actually be that dominant. Optic might not be this kind of top tier dominant team. Now, do I think Carolina particularly is good? No. They somehow beat Toronto, which I actually think is a good team. So, honestly, I've got no idea what's happening here. I think this line, my model has this line a little too big, so I think there's some value on Carolina. But that's kind of it. I think you can maybe play a little bit of Carolina plus 1.5 here and just call it a day. What do you think about this one?
Totally agree with you. I do think Carolina does have a bit of value in this series. I definitely think Optic is the better team. I understand why they're minus 400 on the money line. I understand why they're favored by a map and a half, but I think Carolina really can fight here. If you just look at Carolina since the start of this year, when they have the new lineup in, they've been above average in hardpoint, search, and overload. Like across the board, they've been a good team. Nothing crazy. Like the win over Toronto was very impressive. They also played Miami and Minnesota in this stretch since January 1st. I don't want to put too much stock into those like three results, but really since those have happened, like Carolina I think have crawled their way out of the bottom of the league. Like I think after the first couple weeks in December, it was like, all right, Carolina are in the mix with Vancouver for who is the worst team in the league, and I think they're definitely out of that discussion at this point, and they're more in the discussion with a Minnesota or a Boston or a Cloud9. Like, not that those teams are great either, but these teams are good enough, I think, to compete with these top tier teams. Like on Optic, like no team in this top echelon, I think, has really separated themselves to the point where they should be this big of a favorite over a solid team like Carolina. So I'm with you on this one. Yeah, like Optic to cover a map and a half, I have happening less than 50% of the time. So the fact that it's at minus 163 is a bit steep. And yeah, I just think Ravens, like, they can compete in pretty much any game mode. Like, their hard point on the year doesn't look as good, but again, if we just look at the last few weeks, it looks a lot better. Their search has been pretty consistent throughout the year, even with their old lineup, and their overload has really turned things around. They have not lost in 2026 yet in overload, and two of those wins have been really nice. I like Carolina to cover here. Wouldn't be shocked if they win, honestly. Like, with the way Optic fell flat against Thieves last week, like, if Optic are in a bit of a rut and Carolina's kind of on the climb, like I don't see why Carolina couldn't make some noise and even win this thing. So I think Optic win, but I think Carolina push them to the brink for sure.
Yeah, I think this will be an interesting match. First thing Friday evening, I think it could be interesting. So I'm excited to see this match, see what comes of it. Next up, second match on Friday, we've got Toronto versus Paris. Paris minus 200 the money line, minus 1.5 plus 110. Minus 250 in the hard point, minus 125 in the search, and minus 150 in the control. I think this is too big of a favorite, honestly. I think Toronto is up there. I think maybe this might be a bit of an overreaction to Carolina. I put some Toronto in here. Maybe Toronto plus 1.5 here. I think Toronto plus 1.5 is, I think, plus one, minus 125 or minus 150, I think. I don't hate it, but at the same time, I don't love it either because Toronto did lose to Carolina. Now, is Carolina good or not? I don't know, but this is where the discussions on this are. I lean Toronto here, but I don't know. I could be swayed. I could be persuaded a different way, but for me, it's either Toronto or don't play. What do you see here?
I'm with you again on this one. Yeah, I just talked about how I think all these teams in the top five, and even if you wanted to throw Riyadh in this whole mix and make it a top six, like I think you could make that argument. But yeah, to me, all these teams are really close. To make one team a minus 200 favorite over another at this point just seems a bit rich to me. Like Paris, I still have as the best hardpoint team. I don't think that's debatable. They only lost once, and that was last week to Falcons, and that even was a really close hard point. You look at their other hard point results, they're winning, and they're winning big in a lot of them. And in that same series, they won 250 to 55, I think it was. So Paris, they have that going for them. That's what worries me a little bit about the -1.5, is that they could very easily, I think, win both hard points, and you just got to win one of those searches and overloads. The issue is Paris have been very inconsistent in those two modes, and Toronto have been solid in those. Not bad, but their overload is probably the best in the league if you're Toronto's, and their search has been ho-hum, but I'd take their search over Paris's right now, I think, although I think that's pretty close. And justifiably, the map 2 money line is -125 for Paris. I am with you. Yeah, I think Toronto are closer than this. I think they can force a map 5. If they do, I like their odds. But Toronto sometimes can just show up and just road grade people too. So this one's all over the place. This is a fascinating series because right now these teams are 4th and 5th in the Major 1 qualifier standings. But both actually have the best map win percentage. Both are 12 and 8, I believe. Let me go back to that. Yeah, both are 12 and 8. They both have 2 more series yet to play. So this is a big one in terms of, do you get a top 4 seed or not? Because if you win this, you should get that 4th seed or better. And if you lose this, you'll probably end up in that 5th through 8th discussion, somewhere in there. So it's a big series. I cannot wait to watch this and see how it shakes out. I think I would make Paris a favorite, but it would be way closer than -200. It would be not that much different than a coin flip, in my opinion. So I like where your head's at with Toronto. I think they can really fight here and keep things close and maybe even win this whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Saturday, match 1. And again, I feel we're going to say the opposite about this game. Toronto versus G2. Toronto -225. Toronto -1.5, -110. Toronto -150 in the hard point, -138 in the search, and -334 in the overload. Yeah, I think this might be too big. This might be too big of a number again. I think this is G2 plus 1.5, -125. That's not a horrible number. I think there might be some value on G2 here. What do you think? Yeah, I don't know what to make of G2. They were really not good for a while, but then they just randomly take down FaZe, which we all think is one of the top teams in the game. And now we're sitting here being like, okay, like I don't know. Are they good? Are they not good? They looked good before the season even started, and then they looked really bad in the middle part of the beginning of the season here, and now they look good. So I got nothing here. I think I'm playing G2 if I have to play something here. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I actually really like Toronto in this spot again, and actually more in this series than against Paris, although they're obviously underdogs against Paris, pretty, not big underdogs, but sizable underdogs, and they're pretty sizable favorites in this one against Minnesota. My issue with Minnesota is hardpoint, ultimately, and you can make a case that their overload is not great either. So Minnesota hardpoint, they're 6-6 on the year. They've played some tough teams. They split hardpoints against Optic back in December. They obviously split against Vegas last week. They won 2 against Riyadh, although those were both very close. They have another really close win over Boston. A lot of their wins in hardpoint have been by the skin of their teeth, and they're 6-6 as it stands with a, I'd say, average schedule. But it really could be like 4-8. It's not too far off from that, or even 3-9. And Toronto, we know, are like a solid hardpoint. They're 5-3 on the year. We haven't seen it a lot from them. And they've played, I'd say, a league average schedule as well. But ultimately, like Minnesota, the recipe to beat these teams is to win close. But I just don't think that'll last forever. I think they're going to end up in a situation where they're in a dogfight of a hard point and they end up losing by 10 or 15 or 20 rather than flipping that and winning those every time. So that's a big deal. I think the search could go either way. And honestly, you could make a case maybe Minnesota should be favored in that. So I think that's really close to a 50-50, especially if they play 2 of them. And then the overload is a pretty big mismatch, I'd think. Like Minnesota, one of the worst overload teams according to my numbers. They only have wins on Den so far. And Toronto, perfect on Den. They're also perfect on exposure. They played Scar once, and that was last week against Ravens. So that's the first match for Toronto on Scar overload, and they did not come out on top. So I wonder if they were just testing things against who they thought was an inferior opponent, and then oops, we actually lost the series. Maybe we just shouldn't play Scar Overload. So I think, yeah, Toronto have a sizable advantage there. I think you can make a case maybe that the money line is priced about right, or that Minnesota maybe can beat that number. But as far as the spread goes, like I really have just a lot more faith in Toronto hardpoint, and that makes the -1.5 somewhat appealing to me, at least. If Minnesota get this done, it's probably going to be in a map 5. I know they were just able to beat FaZe in a map 4, but man, a lot of those were close. And I just think eventually these really close maps are going to flip the other way on Minnesota. So I like Toronto here. I think there's even a good chance they could sweep this, because I'm in the opinion that, yeah, like Minnesota, they're not to Surge's level, but they're not too far behind, I don't think. I think they're in that next tier up with Carolina and Boston maybe, but their hard point worries me, so that's why I'm going Toronto.
That's fair, and I don't necessarily hate that play. I'm still curious with Minnesota. I did not think they were going to be able to do that against FaZe, and especially because we saw FaZe absolutely demolish Cloud9 too. I don't know, maybe Minnesota's not bad. We'll see. I'm very curious as is. I'm not hugely on Minnesota here, but I think it's worth a small shot. But we'll see what it looks like. I'm very curious of the outcome of this game. Next up, Riyadh versus Cloud9. Riyadh -300 on the money line. Riyadh -1.5, -120. Riyadh -138 in the hard point, -250 in the search, and -250 in the overload. I absolutely love Riyadh here, especially the -1.5. I think that's insane value. My model was high on Riyadh last week. I got rewarded handsomely for that against Paris. Yeah, give me Riyadh. I'll take Riyadh here.
Yeah, my numbers also point me in the Riyadh direction. So I agree with you for the most part. The one thing that scares me a little bit is the hardpoint vetoes, how they could shake out. So to me, Cloud9 don't really grade out good in anything. They're below average across the board, hardpoint, search, and overload. And Riyadh, especially lately, have really improved their numbers to, I thought they were middle of the pack, but clearly a step down from Optic and Thieves and Paris and all them. But after the results last week, it's like maybe they're a little closer to those teams than I think. Like maybe we'll see this like next tier down from these elite teams, and Riyadh is in that. They're like squarely right there. And maybe that's a smaller tier than we think. Because right now there's 5 teams in a tier below that, but I do think Riyadh are showing up like how we thought they might at the start of the season. So I like Riyadh a little, but hardpoint worries me a little. Cloud9 4-0 on Scar. They're 5-5 on the year. They have a lot. They're a lot like Minnesota. They have some really close wins, a close loss here or there, and some blowout maps that did not go in their favor. Maybe they can weasel their way through in these hard points. I am curious to see if they get to play Scar, because again, 4 of their 5 wins in hardpoint have been on Scar. They're perfect. Riyadh, on the flip side, 0-3 on exposure. So I do wonder where the veto comes from Riyadh. Do you veto a map that you have not won on in exposure? Cloud9 on the flip side also haven't won. So actually, I do think Riyadh might keep that open and just say, Cloud9, you are not playing Scar. We will play you on anything else. So if that's the case, I do feel a lot better about Riyadh. The more I talk about it, the more I like Riyadh. Yeah, their hardpoint numbers aren't great, but against a team like this, I think they can improve those. Search and Overload have been solid for them throughout the year. So yeah, I like Riyadh here. I think a 3-1 is pretty likely. And yeah, -1.5 at -120, not too shabby either. So I expect Falcons.
Yeah, I'm down with Falcons on that one too. Match 3, Thieves versus Boston. Thieves -800 on the money line, -2.5, +137. Thieves -334 in the hard point, 334 in the search, and then -250 in the overload. I'm not touching this at all. You cannot pay me to bet on this game. I don't trust Thieves. I still don't trust Thieves. I don't care that they beat Optic. Power to you. I need to see this a lot more than just beating an Optic team that has always been inconsistent and maybe is now finding inconsistency again this year. I'm not touching this. Do you see anything here?
So I tend to side with Boston in this series, which is really scary. And we'll get to it at the end of the show. But I did have Boston +1.5 at +200 initially in my picks, and I backed off of that. The more I've looked at it, the more I'm like, all right, maybe Thieves have shown us something and maybe they're going to get hot right now. So Boston, right, they have probably the easiest schedule to date, and they're about 500 across the board in terms of maps and series wins. 3-3 in series, and I think they're one map below 500 overall. So to me, if you're about 500 and you've only played like average to below average teams, right? To me, that puts you squarely in like you're the eighth best, ninth best team in the league, probably. And I think that shakes out in the standings. Like, I think right now they're fighting for the 8 seed, and this is the series that could clinch it for them, but I don't feel great about it going their way. But I don't think Thieves should be this big of a favorite. Like, this is a really big number. I'm happy to see Thieves bounce back in a major way and beat an Optic team that we think so highly of. It's just tough with Thieves. We just haven't seen it a lot from them throughout the year. They've only played, I think, 17 maps across 5 series. That's by far the lowest of any team. So in terms of data points, we don't have a ton with Thieves. They've also played a gauntlet of a schedule. Like, they've played Vegas, Riyadh, Paris, Toronto, and Optic. Like, those are all the other really good teams in the leagues. They get a really nice soft landing with Boston, and then they'll play Carolina on Sunday. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I do think they have room for their numbers to really improve quickly. And Boston, I think, are just the opposite, where like their schedule has been so soft and they've been able to do just enough to hang in there. But at the end of the day, yeah, like I do expect Boston not to get swept. And I think they got a good chance even to push it to a map 5. Just with these numbers, like yeah, I don't see any value in Thieves. I just think we have a huge overreaction based on that last series we watched on Sunday. To me, I like Boston a little. I don't love it because I am worried I'm stepping in front of a freight train. But yeah, it's really just hard to make an argument that Thieves should be this big of a favorite.
Yeah, I feel like this is now like, oh, Thieves are back. They're good now. They fixed all the problems. They're set. And I don't believe that. So that's what this line seems to me, and I don't buy that. Honestly, that a little bit on a Boston plus 1.5 at plus 200, that's a little tempting. I don't hate that. I don't hate that. I'll think about that one. Moving on to Sunday, Paris versus Miami. Paris minus 5 on the money line. Paris minus 1.5 minus 200. Paris minus 250 in the hard point, minus 250 in the search, and minus 275 in the overload. Give me Miami here, man. Apparently they're a good team now. So yeah, I'll take Miami here. Honestly, like, this is the problem where it's honestly between all these teams. I honestly don't know who the best one is. If you gave me Paris, FaZe, Toronto, Thieves, Optic, throw in Riyadh in there, throw in Miami in there, heck, maybe even throw in a G2 in there, I don't know which is the best one. I think I probably just named off 8 teams, named off more than half the league there, right? Honestly, I got nothing. Now, maybe through the season we're going to see some more separation. Maybe this game is just super early and people haven't figured it out yet. And once a couple teams figure it out, this is over, and then all of a sudden we're back to a 2-team meta. But this year just seems completely wide open. Maybe it's partly because a lot of these teams are built on stars that are maybe aging a little bit, not like old, but aging, and maybe what we thought was a good team before, maybe it might not be as good of a team. Miami, a team based more on returning, like on kind of relatively newer players. Paris as well. Maybe this is more of a balanced league now. Maybe the skill gap has come down a bit, or maybe the top skill players have come back down a little bit more, and maybe that's what we're dealing with here. I don't know, but no, I love Miami here. Give me Miami plus 1.5 for sure. I think it's plus 150, and I'll take some Miami money line as well. What do you have here?
Yeah, so another interesting one where it's like a Paris minus 1.5 maybe looks appealing at first because their hard point is so good. But Miami's hard point, not too shabby either. They have the second best hard point record, and according to my numbers, second best hard point period in the league. The gap between them and Paris is pretty big. But the fact that they, I think, can really compete with these guys is huge, especially for a plus 1.5. And I really think those map 2 and map 3 numbers are just a little off. Like, neither of these teams have shown a lot in search or overload to the point where, like, they're almost mirror images of each other. Paris is like the sexy version of Miami, and Miami is like the cheap discount version of Paris, where it's like they're really reliant on hardpoint, and then if they can get a search here or an overload here, they can get a series win. So, yeah, fascinated to see how that dynamic plays out in a series like this. I do think, yeah, Paris should be a favorite, but again, these prices are just a touch high for me. Like, these teams in the top five, top six of the league should be, I think, more of a minus 250, minus 300 against a team like Miami, who probably slot in somewhere in the seventh, eighth, ninth discussion overall. But yeah, just fascinated to see specifically how the map 2, map 3, and then map 5 play out if we get those, because it can do a lot for you, right? If you can show some prowess in those, that'll boost your numbers quite a bit in addition to already being good at hardpoint for either of these teams. So I like Paris to win, but I think Miami can definitely keep it close, and I think they've been playing good enough lately where it's not that hard to see, oh yeah, Miami got a map 5 win. It was pretty close all the way through. They could compete with them and with Paris in hard points. Yeah, I think this should be a little tighter, and yeah, I think your point is good. Like, maybe we just have a clustering of teams where there's not really an elite team or two elite teams this year. There's a lot of really good teams and then a lot of good teams that are right behind them too. So this could be a clear example of this on Sunday. So yeah, excited to see this one as well as the Paris versus Toronto series. I think those are two of the ones I'm really keeping an eye on overall this weekend. Yeah, I think Miami can hang with them though at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Miami might be able to put up a good fight here. Sunday, match number 2, Thieves versus Ravens. Thieves minus 400 money line. Thieves minus 1.5, minus 163. Minus 250 in the hard point, 200 in the search, 200 in the overload. I'm not touching Thieves. I'm not touching them. I don't trust this. I don't know how they beat Optic, and I plan to find that out. But at this point, yeah, I'm not touching that so far. I think it's fine to leave for now, and we'll go from there. Do you see any plays in this game or no?
I actually like Carolina, and to me, the prices are identical outside of map 1, map 2, map 3, but Thieves are minus 400 against Ravens. Optic are minus 400 against Ravens earlier in the week. And then same price on the minus 1.5, minus 163 for both teams. So that goes to show that, like, right now the market is like Thieves and Optic. I don't know who's better. They're both very good and they're both huge favorites over a team like Carolina. But to me, yeah, like Carolina have shown enough over the last few weeks where, yeah, maybe they're in that same bucket with Miami or maybe even Riyadh. I know that's maybe tough to see, but like Thieves showed a lot last week, and again, these numbers might be really inflated because of that. I Carolina to hang around here and maybe make this tough. Like, I view these series very similar. I think Carolina could beat one of Optic or Thieves. It's tough, but I think they could do it. They can hang around in pretty much any game mode. Hardpoint's probably going to be their toughest one, but I could definitely see them winning some searches or some overloads against either of these teams. If they can get one of these wins, awesome. If not, at least keep these close, and I think they really can. So I like Carolina here. To me, it looks a lot like the Optic series on Friday. We'll see if they come through, but they have looked quite a bit better over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I still don't love Carolina though. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll be betting them a little bit, but I'm not touching this. I need to see a lot more from them before I touch Thieves or against Thieves. To be fair, last match of the weekend of the qualifiers: Vancouver versus FaZe minus 1,600 on the money line. Vegas minus 2.5, minus 120. FaZe minus 450 in the hard point, 400 in the search, and 450 in the overload. Yeah, they're the favorites. They should be the favorites. I don't know if I'm betting minus 2.5 here though, but I'm also not betting the plus 2.5. So yeah, this game is not particularly interesting, and I don't think I'm going to be caring too much about this game. Do you see anything of value here or no?
I actually like Vegas. I know they're huge favorites, but Vancouver have 4 map wins in 6 series, I believe. I think they've played 6 times already. Yeah, they played 6 times. They won a series against Boston that went the distance. And then they were able to get to a map 4 against Optic. I think that's your hope, right? Like they squeezed out a overload win 4-3 against Optic. So that's maybe the path how they get this one done, but I don't know, man. Like FaZe right now, I know the Minnesota series didn't go their way, but I think they're playing really well. And Vancouver, even with the new lineup, that's great that they got a win against Boston, but the games against Optic did not go that well. They were able to squeak out one win. They played Miami last week. That wasn't close at all. And we actually thought Vancouver might be able to put up a fight against that sort of team. So to me, all things point to FaZe just killing them in this. And I think you can make a case that, like, this series looks a lot like the FaZe versus Cloud9 series we just saw a few days ago. So that's more where I'm going with this. Like, Vancouver, good that they made the roster move. Maybe it helps them. It probably doesn't help them enough. And FaZe, to me, still on an upward trajectory, even with the Minnesota loss. So -2.5 at -120. I don't think it's crazy. I think they sweep them more than half the time, to the point where it's like I would maybe have it at -150, -180. I don't know. I know that's steep, but it's hard when you have teams that are on such opposite sides of the spectrum. So I'll take FaZe here, but maybe Vancouver can surprise me. I don't know. We'll see how they shake out on Sunday.
Yeah, I yeah. This will be an interesting game, but again, after this, it's on to Major One, which will start next Thursday, and you'll be very excited about that. Model Warfare, again, we did not have a particularly great week last week, but here are our picks for this week. I've got Riyadh -1.5 versus Cloud9. I'm taking Miami +1.5 versus Paris. And then I'm also going Carolina +1.5 versus Texas, Optic. And then which picks do you have for this week?
Yeah, I really like Toronto, specifically in their series against Minnesota. I think Toronto are clearly in that top group. I think Minnesota are getting by in a lot of these maps, but their luck will end at some point. So I think Toronto can win that pretty quickly. We just talked about it. I think Vegas to sweep Vancouver, it's not a great price, but man, it's just really hard to make a case that Vancouver can win anything. Like, they have, I want to say they have at least one map win in each mode this year. But yeah, like they're 1-7 hardpoint, 1-6 search, 2-4 in overload. So maybe it's overload that they get it done, but I think Vegas are starting to find their form right now, and I don't want to put too much into that game against Minnesota. And then I'm with you on Carolina, but in their other series against Thieves, I wanted both of these to be represented in some way, and I'm glad that we have both of them listed here. I just think they can hang with either of these teams, Optic or Thieves, and maybe even win one of those series. So just got to get to map 5 to get there, and I think they're more than capable of doing so.
Yeah, it will be an interesting week. There's some interesting plays for this week. Definitely looking forward to seeing it, specifically on Friday and Saturday. Not as much on Sunday, but that's okay. Both NFL Conference Championship games on Sunday. But again, next week, no football, Major One. So that's the big one right there. And as we keep saying, next week is Major One. We will have it out. We will be out by Wednesday because obviously the first games are on Thursday. We're going to be running our models. We're going to say who we think has the best chances to win, comparison between our models and the book odds. Again, I can't even speculate on that because we barely speculate on that because we have no idea. I honestly have no idea who even the favorite's going to be. I think in the past we've been able to pretty definitively say who the favorite's going to be for the major that's coming up the next week. I got no idea. I think Optic, just because of public money, they know public money is going to come in on Optic, so they're just going to put Optic as the favorite. But that means, if that is the case, if I'm right, I could be wrong. I don't know. I could be wrong. But if I'm wrong, that means there's going to be insane value on literally anyone else to win the major. Just a heads up there. So we will obviously be sharing our thoughts with you guys on that next week. Other than that, yeah, any other closing thoughts here for week 5 here?
Yeah, just excited to see how these last qualifiers shake out. I'm fascinated to see how the final seeding ends up, and I think that's going to be a really big deal. Like, I think if you're one of these elite teams going into Major 1 and you end up with a favorable first round match, that could catapult you into the winner's bracket final and maybe into the grand finals overall. But yeah, we'll have obviously a very clear picture next week when we finally get that bracket. But yeah, excited to watch this weekend's matches just to see how those start shaking out.
Yeah. We will see you guys next week. See you, everybody.